Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the digital tiny room. I am your co-host from Michael and Benjamin's podcast. I'm Michael, and I am joined by the man who has been called the original Ben of Michael and Benjamin's podcast. It's Ben.
That's me, you fuckers who put me on an island in a bloody insane asylum.
Surrounded by dinosaurs.
It's taken me all bloody week to swim back. It's been a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm not
but
gonna
you're
lie.
safe now.
It's been...
And your episode has ended.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan of being locked up. I did hear that the pod was made in my absence, Michael. Thank you for sending out a search party, you fucker. You just let me get kidnapped. Kidnapped is what happened.
It's not kidnapped, Ben. It's called you were sectioned, and it was for your own good.
It probably was. I feel much better now, Michael.
And the good of the pod.
For what it's worth to the commenters, listeners, and my co-host, please don't mention anything based around the verb to become. Just leave it out, okay? Because I have...
You're triggered.
I have been warned by Dr. Svellenhertz that it's a triggering phrase for me.
Very good.
Not unlike the Manchurian Candidate that sends me into a kind of rage. So
or the Winter Soldier.
Or the Winter Soldier.
Stock car. Homecoming. 13.
Yeah, pretty much. Just anything to do with that wonderful verb, which references transitioning from one thing to another. We will have less of that. Thanks very much now.
Benjamin, since we're covering grudges this week, I would like to publicly announce my new arch nemesis. My new arch nemesis is plants which pollinate themselves with wind-blown pollen.
Well,
they're real sons of bitches.
They're nefarious. I hear.
Well, I suppose they're not sons of bitches. They're sons of other trees, but they're real
sons of birches, if you will.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything that was very good though. Or sons of beeches.
Oh, that would have been even better. That's
but beech
better.
the tree, not beech the geographical feature.
Beech with a double E.
People listen to this podcast, Ben, and then they think, well, why are they going to talk about comics and pop culture and whatnot? Are they just going to talk about pollen the whole time?
Welcome back to Michael and Benjamin's Botanical Podcast, inaugural edition. The pop culture route wasn't working for us, so join us every week when we discuss themes and tropes to do with pollen and bumblebees.
Ben, have you seen the new plant, Luke Cage?
The new plant, Luke Cage.
I
don't have a fauna-based or flora-based pun for that.
Yeah.
Look, we're dropping the theme back to comic books and pop culture.
Here we go.
Let's get back.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it. I've heard reviews.
Go on.
I hear it's a little bit better. I hear we've tweaked and honed an iron fist and made him a little bit less meh.
Well, Ben, I haven't seen Iron Fist yet. I'm about halfway through. I think he's only in a single episode.
Okay, he is, but I hear good things.
Yeah, it's good so far. Like all the Netflix shows, it's a bit slow. It is a bit slow.
They have pacing issues lately. I don't know what that is.
I don't think it's lately. I think even Daredevil Season 1, if you go back and look at it, was a bit slow. And even Jessica Jones Season 1 was a bit slow. And they're my two favourites.
Mm.
And I think they were a bit slow. And even Defenders, which was only 8 episodes, was also a bit slow.
That's not
great. Ben,
Yes.
I think one of the central one of the central divisive things about Luke Cage is how invested are you in Mariah Dillard as a character?
Mariah Dillard is the girl who took over, the woman who took over from Cottonmouth, I assume.
Yes, exactly. Because it is as much, if not more, her story than Luke Cage's.
Oh, then I couldn't give a fuck.
And if you're into that, it's grand. It's very good. It's very exciting and very enjoyable because she's doing her machinations and she's up to things and what's she doing next.
But Michael, yeah, because I had a question.
Okay, go on.
I had a question. What if you're not into that, Michael?
Well, then it's not very exciting because it's basically Luke Cage using his invulnerability to fight a politician, a wheeler dealer. You know what I mean? And although they do bring in Bushmaster this year, so there's a physical threat to Luke Cage as well.
Okay, so there's an owl Bushmaster.
It's a three-way thing, if you know what I mean, Ben.
Bushmaster, Luke Cage, and Mariah Dillard have a three-way.
Yes, the Devil's three-way.
Oh God,
they don't have a three-way, but it's a three-way rivalry sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Does Mariah get jealous that Bushmaster's taking all Luke Cage's time?
No, not at all. Bushmaster, he's from Jamaica, obviously.
Fair enough.
And this isn't me, Ben. Someone in the series says, "Jamaican me crazy."
Okay.
Very good. But he.
I don't know how I feel about that.
He hates the Stokes family, so he's out for revenge on them, and he wants to get rid of Luke Cage, and Luke Cage wants to get rid of both of them, obviously. So they all hate each other, and it's a big thing. One of the best things, Ben, is seeing like a mainstream TV show with loads of Jamaican patois.
Ooh, patois. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's very good. The cool thing is, well, actually, this is a funny thing about it. You know, Ben, Jamaican patois sounds a lot like Irish English in a lot of ways.
It can in certain factors, sure.
So there are often times when they're talking about Luke Cage, and they sound like Irish people from the countryside.
Sure, your man Luke Cage down the road there now.
Luke Cage, exactly. They talk a bit like they're talking about Luke Cage. That's my impression of an Irish person from the country, not a Jamaican.
Oh man!
But then they're using the patois, and it's great. They'll say something like, "Them here in Harlem looking for Luke Cage," but I watched it with closed captions on, and in episode 1, 2, and 3, the closed captions translated the Jamaican patois into standard English.
Yes.
So they would say something like, "Him have the heart of Harlem rasclad," and it would translate into, "Luke Cage controls the heart of Harlem, you fool."
You fool. Oh, nice.
It was great. But then, in episode 4, the closed captions don't translate anymore. They just say it directly.
Oh, what?
So, yeah, exactly. Were you a deaf person, you would be very confused about why half of the characters suddenly completely changed their way of speaking.
Oh, okay. So, as a non-deaf person, it's fine for us, but for the gang over there, not so.
Yeah, I think they had different people provide the closed captions for different episodes.
They must have.
They
must have outsourced.
But look, Ben, it's a good series. There's lots of Luke Cage superheroing. He does lots of fights, and he gets shot a lot, and people hit him with things, and the things break. And it's very much about his journey and avoiding going to the dark side.
Any hints at a Diamondback return?
No, not so far. I don't think we'll see that. It's very much a new story.
Okay, good.
And I'm a couple of episodes deep, and Misty Knight hasn't got her new arm yet.
Okay, but it's coming.
Oh yeah, well, there's promotional images.
When did she lose her arm?
In the Defenders.
I ignored a lot of I kind of blocked it out. That would explain that.
I think it was Bakudo. Remember that drip from Iron Fist?
The hand.
The
Bakudo.
Boring member of the hand, the one who trained teenagers.
Yeah,
I think he cut her arm off.
Very Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles circa 1980 something.
Oh, it was dreadful. He was one of the worst.
Yeah, just very dull. Just a dull old time. Yeah, no, it wasn't great.
Anything else, Ben? Anything else?
In terms of stuff like that, no. I just want to have a little chitty chat. This is unscripted chitty chat, actually.
Oh, Ben, I don't like this. I'm on edge.
No. It's good, Michael. But you did another comics roundup this week, Michael, which I really enjoyed.
Good.
And in it was Avengers #2 from the new run of Avengers, and I commented below it.
4.
I commented below it, Michael. I said, wow, this new Avengers run is a ton of fun in my traditional kind of skippy American accent. And you said, disagree, with an exclamation mark. Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of it.
Okay, fair enough. Can you tell me why?
Look, Art
Tell
is
me
fine.
why, tell me sweet
let's start with that.
wise. Yeah, go on.
How, let's make sure we're talking about the same run, first of all. This is the one where a new team of Avengers are fighting Loki, and Loki has brought a new celestial host to Earth.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. I don't really like it because I don't care about the new evil Celestials who killed the old Celestials. For one thing, we saw the whole idea of they're able to kill Celestials.
Mm-hmm.
Celestials falling out of the sky, oh, it's so terrifying. That whole, oh, they're able to kill Celestials, they're super powerful, was used not a year ago in Jonathan Hickman's, whatever the world-ending series was called. When they wanted to show that the builders were really powerful, they killed a lot of Celestials. Other things as well, like the stuff that's happening with Thor and Odin and Loki, directly contradicts what's happening in Thor's own comic at the moment.
Okay.
Which I just think I'm having less tolerance for as I get older. I like things self-contained. Or if they're going to be interconnected, I like them to be properly interconnected.
Yeah, no, I mean that's perfectly fair. Who's writing it? I can't remember who's writing the Avengers run. I know Jason Aaron's is back on Thor. He's Thoring the day away again.
Oh, it's Jason Aaron.
Oh, okay, that's surprising. I would have thought that it would be someone else, because if there's that much of a juxtaposition, you'd think maybe he's working it in.
That is bizarre, Ben.
Yeah,
I hadn't noticed that. I have both comics here. I honestly hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, that's a
Why
weird.
is he contradicting himself?
He's contradicting himself. That's what I mean. That's really weird.
That is odd.
One of the things I find really fascinating with this, because as you know, Justice League has just rebooted itself in the DC universe, and both of them are drawing heavily on their Silver Age influence.
Yes.
Which I find really interesting, because I think people have, oddly enough, had enough of these really dark, cynical runs and world-ending things. Now, obviously, world-ending events aren't going to end in comic books, but it's interesting that possibly the two biggest super teams on the planet, Justice League and thing, it's interesting that they're going with an old-school, lighter approach, or kind of very much nostalgic approach. Because the Celestials are a big time kind of Silver Age Kirby thing, and then the Legion of Doom is back in the JLA, all of which I find really interesting. It's interesting that they're going back to do all that kind of thing, and it's funny that Jason Aaron's is almost a direct parallel to Scott Snyder, in terms of being an author who was given his own runs, then upgraded to a big character. Scott Snyder got Batman. And Jason Aaron's got Wolverine for a while. And now they're being brought on board as the big dog, to take over the helm, I suppose, if you will. And Scott Snyder's been given his shot at Justice League, and bloody Jason Aaron's been given his shot at Avengers.
Interesting.
But it's interesting.
I had not put that two and two together there. On the topic of things being kind of rebooted, based on your recommendation, I'm really enjoying the Wildstorm.
Yes, it's rather good, isn't it?
It's a fresh take. It has the excitement and the vibe that the Ultimates had back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, but I think it's a little bit cleaner. I think it's.
It is. It's really good. It's really strong, but it has that. It has the feeling of the height of Marvel. This comparison for me of it's like the Ultimates in the early 2000s is a very positive comparison.
Yes, I know.
In the beginning of the Ultimates, it was really great seeing these characters updated and modernized, and you're always wondering, like, how are they going to bring Thor in, and how are they going to what's this version of bloody the Black Knight going to look like? And that's what the Wildstorm feels like. I can't wait for it. It's going to split off into other series, and
is it?
It's 24 issues of the Wildstorm, and then it's going to split off into two other series.
Is Vertigo? We're going to have an Authority, I think, probably.
I think one of them is going to be the Authority, because mild spoilers, obviously. It looks like the Doctor and Jenny Sparks are heading towards setting up an authority.
Yep, it seems that way.
And remember you said last week that the bird wing girl is gone.
Yeah.
They haven't. She's not gone. She's the doctor.
Oh, they've just amalgamated.
They've merged the two. They've amalgamated her, and she has magic wings instead of physical wings.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't it interesting?
I think
good.
possibly my favorite character in the new run is the engineer. I think she's pretty good in this one. I like that.
Yeah.
You know, I like that she's slowly. First of all, I like that she hasn't just been gifted, the suit, and I like that she upgrades herself. She's like a young, slightly confused Iron Man.
There's a lot of Iron Man similarities,
different versions and stuff like that. It's interesting. I'm digging it. I really like it as a series.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm also looking forward to are they going to introduce Planetary? Are they going to introduce those characters? It's very exciting.
Well, they're going to have to come in at some point, I'd say, won't they?
I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know. Maybe they'll come in as an amalgamation. Oh, it's very exciting.
Yeah. So Warren Ellis back at his A game.
Yeah,
goes to show you
good.
these things shouldn't be rewritten by people who don't create them. Like Warren Ellis clearly just has a much clearer idea of what he wants his stories and characters to do.
Although to be fair, most of the characters he's working with in the early goings are Jim Lee characters, not Warren Ellis characters.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, because he's Wildcats, isn't he? That's Jim Lee.
Jim Lee was Wildcats. Jim Lee started Stormwatch too.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that.
And then Warren Ellis came along, killed off most of the Jim Lee characters, and introduced his own.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
So the likes of Zealot, Grifter, Deathblow, they're all Jim Lee guys.
It's interesting seeing Zealot back, because she was Zealot is the female character with the white hair, isn't it?
Yeah, she's like a sexy, evil dominatrix, Lucy Lawless, Xena warrior princess.
She was
with
in the
blonde hair.
She was in the Justice League for a while, wasn't she? She was the second stringer in the league.
The whole Wildstorm thing got merged in. Apollo was in.
Yeah, I remember that.
Was in.
No, you're right.
What team he was in?
He was in. He was in JLA. He was in the Justice League of America. For a while, they split the Justice League and the Justice League of America. And the Justice League of America was actually a Justice League created by Amanda Waller to compete with the kind of international Justice League aspect.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, a real strong recommendation. I'm really enjoying it. I'm looking forward to future episodes.
Good.
Ben,
good. Yeah.
If you were to say that Tom Holland was famous for anything, what would you say he's famous for?
He's famous for not keeping his big old mouth shut.
Yes, I was going to say he's famous for being in that film, The Incredible. Is that what it was called?
The Incredible.
The Impossible.
The Impossible. I think.
Impossible.
Yeah.
The one about the tidal wave that freaks me out.
Yeah. The Impossible, I think, is the name of it. Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't think he's most famous for that. No.
No, he's not.
No.
But he has done The Impossible.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Just. Do you know what? I'm going to do what people do to dogs who piss on the carpet. Just stick your nose in there for a second and sit with it.
That was one of the best segues.
No.
Anyway, he told us the name of the new Spider-Man movie.
Which is?
Well, I don't know. This could be fake.
Oh.
And then we're reporting fake news. But anyway, the internet says it's called Spider-Man Far From Home.
Far From Home, a possible reference to the fact that he doesn't exist anymore in the main MCU universe.
Oh, is that what you think? Everyone who got turned into dust went into an alternate dimension?
Be interesting, wouldn't it? Be interesting. Or he's trapped inside a soul stone. I mean, there's a lot of different theories that could be chucked around there. Yeah, I heard about this. Sorry, go on.
Or he's in New Jersey.
New Jersey. Far from New York, where he's from.
New Jersey.
What is this strange place? What the hell? I can't even get a decent sub.
Yeah. Mr. Stark.
That's
anyway, Tom Holland impression.
I think.
Oh, Mr. Stark, help me, Mr. Stark! I'm a Spider-Man.
I think we're probably going to mess around with the new cosmic suit, which is kind of cool. Which is interesting.
Do you think it's going to be Spider-Man Suspense?
I think it might be Spider-Man Suspense, which grinded my gears, Michael, because, as you know, there's a terrible 90s movie coming out in 2018 for some reason. And that terrible 90s movie is called Venom, and it stars Tom Hardy as a rough and gruff reporter who prizes the mantle of Venom, and we are Venom. Yeah. And as you know, Venom is pretty much Spider-Man's shadow self. He's a bloody big, hulking form of all the aggression, anger, and murderous impulses that Spider-Man fights back. And they manifest into a suit that has a bit of a hard-on.
Young.
Yeah, well, I'm young in the crap out of this. Get over it. But the unfortunate thing about this is the symbiote is actually an alien.
It's an alien.
And the really annoying thing here is this would have been a perfect way for something to attach itself to Spider-Man, give him a little hand in the film. So, for example, Spider-Man gets his ass kicked. He finds this tiny little shred of kind of black ink-like substance that moves around.
Very good.
The black ink, maybe he gets beaten up. Maybe the black ink substance kind of heals him a little bit. It merges with his body, and then he finds that it helps him. And in return for that, he looks after the little black-like symbiote thing. And when he comes back to Earth for Spider-Man 3, we could have had a nice introduction. You know, we know where the symbiote comes from. We know it's an alien force. They have a strong bond. The symbiote is clearly very attached to Peter Parker, and Peter Parker is very clearly attached. And it would actually suit Tom Holland's characterization, because the characterization that he has for Peter Parker is quite a caring, kind of soft character.
Yeah. Like, I can't throw out the little alien thing. It's really nice.
It's like his pet, and slowly over time we see that all change. So I think that could have been a really interesting way. But we can't have that now. Instead, we get bloody Tom Hardy in a tracksuit. By the way, just Tom Hardy, Mr. Hardy.
Tom Hardy,
this is nothing against you. Tom, this is nothing against you. This is against the horrible characterization in your film. So I get to watch Tom Hardy in sweatpants kill people in a 90s movie instead.
Very good.
But seriously, Marvel Studios, if you want to hire me on as a screenwriter, just send me a quick message at my personal email. I'll stick it in the link down below. Don't tell Michael. He'll get very pissy.
I will.
But honestly, I'll come in. I'll fix your universe. It's fine.
Yeah. Now, bear in mind, he has no experience or qualifications, but that's fine. Don't worry about
that. But it's never stopped me having a job before. Anyway.
Benjamin, do you remember a few weeks ago, Benjamin, we did an SCP episode?
Yes.
One of our most popular episodes ever.
It is our most popular episode ever. There's no.
That's true. Actually.
It is our most popular episode ever. I think we're up around the 900 mark at this point.
900, on the YouTube.
900 views.
A couple hundred more listens as well. Anyway, Benjamin, since then, have you been reading any SCPs?
I have, Michael, because I've become very attached to the SCP community. I think it's a very interesting kind of subculture. I dig it.
Positive vibes.
I dig it, yeah. And one that I've become really, really fascinated with is SCP-701. It is classed as Euclid.
Okay.
Which is very interesting.
What that means.
It means that it is contained and safely contained for the time being. So this one is called The Hanged King's Tragedy. And my favourite thing about it, Michael, is it's a bit meta. And you know I love an old meta moment.
Oh, yeah, very meta.
I love it. I love a meta moment. So The Hanged King's Tragedy is about a play. And basically this play, when it's found and performed by a troupe, runs perfectly normal for about the first 2 weeks. And then the second 2 weeks in rehearsals, actors start to kind of ad-lib things that aren't in the script. Now, they ad-lib the same thing. So whether the troupe is from Washington or whether the troupe is from, Delaware, Washington to Delaware, did you see? I did that quite well there. Whether they're performing in different parts of the country or whatever, the same characters perform the same ad-libbing.
Oh, okay? Very good. I like that.
So that starts to happen, and the play starts to manifest itself in a different way. And then, when they start doing dress rehearsals, a mysterious entity starts to appear in glimpses on the stage. Yes.
No, you're the mysterious entity.
Yes, I'm the mysterious entity that appears on the stage. It's me. No, it's not me. But then, the best part, and this is the part that you'll really like, Michael, this is the part you'll really sink your teeth into. What happens is, finally...
Okay, come on, hit me.
On the night of the play, what happens is, one of the characters who owes a debt is actually ritually murdered on stage, completely unscripted, on behalf of this entity. So the other actors in the play murder this character in a very specific ritual, and then a big bloodbath breaks out. A big bloodbath breaks out, and they murder the audience. And anyone who survives the audience leaves the theater and begins to murder people in their own personal life. So it's a very murderous object, and it's really cool.
What it reminds me, Ben, slightly of is the King in Yellow. Have you ever heard of the King in Yellow?
Oh my god, you son of a bitch! You went and jumped all over my bit, you fucker!
Oh no, was that? Did you have that? Sorry,
you absolute fucker! You went. It is very like the King in Yellow, Michael. How did you end up reading?
What happens when you? I think I read the King in Yellow, Ben, because as you know, I like a Lovecraft, obviously.
Yes, the huge Lovecraft. But oh my god, you're just stealing my bits. You're stealing my book. I'm all written here.
Have you ever played the board game Arkham Horror?
No, I haven't played the Arkham game. No,
it's a very good board game. It's very enjoyable. It's mechanically, it's not a great board game. I mean, it's a bit long, and once you've figured out how to beat it, it's pretty easy. But it's thematically very good. And the King in Yellow and an Evil Play is one of the expansions for that. So that's how I heard it.
Okay, so that's how you heard of it. Yeah, well, it is a very famous kind of proto-horror. No, it's not proto-horror, it's full horror, but it's kind of a famous marker for that kind of creeping dread horror or insanity horror or cosmic horror. Mm-hmm. And as you said, it's very much, it influenced Lovecraft. He read it in 1902 or 1922 or around then, and it had a big influence on him, and he even references it in his work. But The King in Yellow is a book by a man called Robert W. Chambers, and it's a Victorian collection of short stories, all around a central theme, and the central theme in this particular case is the King in Yellow, or the colour yellow. And quite often what happens is each of the things is joined together by this obsession with the King in Yellow or the yellow sign. And what it is the King in Yellow, it's named after... The King in Yellow is an entity, much like the one in the SCP thing. It's an entity that manifests and is kind of a big, otherworldly, controlling presence, bit of a Cthulhu or something like that, but a more human version. And it's a forbidden play, and anyone who reads the play goes a bit mad. They go off the reservation, and then podcast usurpers send them off to mental institutions and have them locked up so they can talk about bloody Karate Kid.
Very good. If there was an entity that was you, it would be called a Bentity.
But yeah, so that's what happens. It's very interesting, very meta. Obviously, the characters mentioned over. There's a couple of refrains that come back again and again. One of them is, "Have you found the yellow sign?" So these characters go in search of this yellow sign to mark the coming of the King in Yellow. It's really, really interesting. But it's obviously very heavily influenced the young man or young lady who wrote that SCP entry. I think there's a couple of differences. The King in Yellow doesn't necessarily drive people to a murderous rage. He kind of just drives them insane.
Yeah.
And so it's not as murdery. But it's just interesting to see how it's influenced by quite a famous thing. I recommend The King in Yellow if you feel like being very unsettled. It's very Victorian and a little bit over the top, but it's also very unsettling in parts. There are 3 particular stories: the Yellow Sign, the King in Yellow, and I can't remember the third one. But the 3 that make up kind of the core narrative of the thing are very unsettling to read. It's a good crack all around.
That whole theme also leaked into a lot of the better Warhammer literature.
Really?
Yeah, there's a couple of... because Warhammer obviously is very heavily influenced by Victorian creeping horror too.
Creeping dread.
Creeping dread is what you're saying. Or even just specifically by Cthulhu stuff. I can't put my finger on the name of a book or anything, but there are lots of touring troops of various things that things start going wrong when they show up, or just one evil circus
Nice.
that spreads disease and travels from town to town, and people go along and everyone's fun and everyone's laughing, and then people start getting diseases and noses start falling off, but everyone finds that hilarious.
Oh, nice. So it's like that collective madness kind of thing. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's very Bradbury. Very Bradbury. Something wicked
Now,
this way comes.
Ben, you have thrown the word Victorian in there.
I have. I've been...
For our international listeners, for people who don't come from a country who lived under the yoke of the British.
Fucking Brits!
The hated English. What was I saying? Yes, for people who didn't live under the yoke of the hated English. Do you want to explain what that means?
Well, the Victorian, when we use the word Victorian, it refers to the time period of the 19th century or 1800s, because we always jump one ahead. So from 1800 to the 1900s, I suppose. Very, very specifically, though, it refers to the reign of Queen Victoria. That's where it gets its name. Queen Victoria was the dominant monarch throughout that age. It was
of England.
Of England, sorry, I should point that out. But more importantly, and I suppose you could look at it as the end of the Great British Empire in certain ways. And I think, obviously, it had massive implications worldwide. But what it really affected was literature at the time. The Victorian era has had a huge influence on literature even today. And really, when we talk about literature and things like that, usually we look at it as a way to hold up your mirror to a society. And because Victorian England had just come out of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was really an established thing now. Cities were bigger than ever. London was this huge, sprawling monstrosity. And immigration became a huge thing for the British Empire. Because, Michael, when you skip around... When you skip around and take over various countries and tell everyone that they're British, you can't really get pissed off when those people come over to Britain and say, well, I'm a British citizen. You can't say, no, you're a British citizen when you're over there, but you can't be a British citizen over here. So what happened was, and the analogy that I was always given at university, where I studied literature.
College boy, is it?
Yes, indeed. The analogy I was always given for that was, if you think about England as a huge hand, okay? Basically, during their Great British expansion and their colonization of the world, they kind of stretched that hand over the planet, okay?
Very good.
And they put different fingers in different countries, and now Africa, and now India, you know yourself, continents
like
and stuff
you,
like
Ben.
that. Yeah, sure. Stop that.
Hopping
Michael.
from country to country, putting your fingers in places.
Michael. I'm sorry to any former flames listening to the podcast. If you are, please stop mailing me pieces of your hair.
It's weird.
It's getting uncomfortable, and my mother's quite upset. Basically, that hand expanded into different countries, and then. In the 19th century...
That one that you're holding up?
The one that I'm holding up. This hand... Stop it, Michael! Jesus! Wept. Anyway, that hand expanded into different countries, and then the Victorian era is where things started coming back up the hand.
Ugh.
So, if you think of it that way, things started to move along the hand into the main body, and that's what happened to London. London became this huge melting pot. And the literature at the time really reflected that. You have, in Victorian literature, really what you have is you have some very big authors there. You have Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. You have Oscar Wilde in The Picture of Dorian Gray. You have Charles Dickens and the various things that he put together. They're too numerous to mention. But these have become big archetypes in our literature, and certainly the precursors to modern popular literature. But... what is more important for us here at the podcast, Michael, is with this massive expansion of cities, towns, etc., came a mass expansion in literacy, which was a big jump, and that became especially dominant in the Victorian era. So the working classes and the middle classes became literate, which led to a brand new call for more forms of fiction and literature. So you didn't have to have an education anymore, and the way that demand was met, because unfortunately at the time, if you wanted to read a Dickens or an Oscar Wilde or something like that, you had to pay a pretty penny. You had to pay about 12 pennies for the serialized novels from people like Dickens or Verns or something like that. So in order to meet demand for poorer people that couldn't afford that, along came the release of something called a penny dreadful.
Oh, very good.
A penny dreadful. And a penny dreadful is very, 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 very simply a
TV show.
A cheap, often serialized novel or novella that you could pick up for no more than a penny.
Very good.
And the key trait of it is, because they couldn't afford to pay decent writers, you got lads that like to try their hands at fiction. So you had this really sensationalist, over-the-top kind of fiction.
Like Jason Aaron.
Yeah, no, Jason Aaron. Oh, come on, get out.
I got him.
Zing. Yeah, but basically, you got really over-the-top things. It would have been the start of the mass horror genre. It would have been the start of your supernatural entity genre. It would have been the start of all these things. And really...
It's where pop culture comes from.
This is where pop culture comes from, Michael.
Right. Okay,
this is where pop culture comes from. Exactly, Michael.
Carry on.
You're ahead of me on the curve. So, I mean, penny dreadfuls have had quite an influence. For example, did you know that there was a famous 1845 serialized penny dreadful called Varney the Vampire?
Varney the Vampire.
But it wasn't very good. But what it did leave is a distinguishing mark on the physical appearance of a vampire. Varney the Vampire is the first instance where a vampire has sharp incisors that they can retract.
Oh.
Yeah, that didn't exist before Varney the Vampire. So
that's very interesting. How did they get your blood?
Yep, even if they used to like scratch at you and then lick.
Ugh, gross.
Yeah, it was weird.
That'll get infected.
It was real weird. So anyway, after that, that kind of shaped how we view vampires today. So it's kind of interesting. So these penny dreadfuls had a huge influence on how we consume literature more than anything else. We like this cheap, accessible literature, and I suppose in many ways, comic books are one of the many illegitimate children of that genre. Obviously, you can see that influence even today. I mean, we just finished up with that series, Penny Dreadful, named after the aforementioned on Sky Atlantic over here, which had the old Ava Green as a sexy possessed lady.
She was a very sexy possessed lady.
And then we had
my lady friend actually does a very good impression of her.
Oh, does she? Oh man, can we get your lady friend on the podcast to do an Eva? Can we have Eva Green, but your lady friend, on the podcast as a special guest? That'd be great.
Oh, I'm Ava Green, and I'm going to do. Oh, look at monsters.
Got it. Nailed it, Michael.
It's better than...
Apparently, there's not only one person in that house going to do a decent Ava Green impression. There's two of them.
That TV show
anyway.
Also famously largely filmed in Dublin.
It was filmed in sections of Trinity College. So yeah, it had Josh Hartnett as a sexy werewolf. And yeah, so I mean, all these tropes of kind of mythological creatures being brought into cities. So, for example, you had your Wolfman, you had your Dracula, you had these things. These are all Victorian tropes that have really gone on to inspire a lot of comics today, Michael. You and I have talked before about Sherlock Frankenstein on this podcast, and he is a bloody mega Victorian character.
He's an immigrant.
He is.
He's a mad scientist.
Yes.
Yeah, he comes from the working class.
He comes from the working classes. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps using technology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Ben.
I mean, it's all super interesting. These tropes have really carried forward. I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, I mean, you hit on a couple of interesting notes there. Immigration being a big, big trope in Victorian literature, not always a positive one. If you go back to Sherlock Holmes, every villain he had in his original serialized run on the Strand was a bit foreign, a bit exotic. So, and it was always, look at that savage from this country committing murders and blah, 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 blah. Or they'd use, an oriental ritual, or, the word oriental got thrown around a lot. It wasn't great.
Dracula,
but, I mean,
a Victorian character?
Sorry, say that again?
Is Dracula a Victorian character?
Dracula is a Victorian... Well, I mean, okay, so the actual inspiration for Dracula is very much not a Victorian character. Vlad Dracul was an actual emperor or king, emperor, prince, we call it, of of a country called Wallachia way back in the day, which then later transitioned into Transylvania, which then became modern Romania. But
thanks for that, Ben.
The overall narrative, and that famous vampire narrative, I suppose, the most influential vampire narrative of all time, was very much Victorian, written by an Irishman. An Irishman.
Yeah, and an Irishman, I suppose.
To London. An Irishman to London.
And very much about the terrors of immigration as well.
Very much about the terrors of immigration, because sure look at Dracula. He's only a bloody Romanian immigrant, really, when you break it down, and he's causing terror. So I mean, all of those novels kind of reflected very much the fear and stress. We've got your classic, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And really, what that was a look at was London had become this massive kind of monstrosity of a city, and people were worried about what it was doing to people psychologically. People were worried, about the crime rates in these cities and things like that. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is very much an example of what happens when a good man, Dr. Jekyll, lives in a city and has his mind warped and becomes a monster like Mr. Hyde. I mean, we were all investigating these things. So, I mean, these are some of the big themes: immigration, the working classes, technology, moral degradation that goes with all of that. I mean, these were all things that Victorians were very much wrapped up in, and the Penny Dreadful did nothing to help those. They sensationalized them and turned them into great big things. But without them, Michael, we'd have feck all today. We'd have feck all today, my friend.
A lot fewer comic characters.
Yeah, a lot fewer. I mean, some of the most famous comic book writers in the world have borrowed heavily from Victorian narratives.
Well, smash me with some examples there, Ben.
Well, I mean, probably the most famous example in terms of just sheer blatant rip-offery is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Is that rip-offery or homagery?
I mean, it's a bit of both, to be honest. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen just borrowed from everything to do with the Victorian era. It borrowed from well-established characters, well-established narratives like Dracula, to lesser-known Penny Dreadful characters like Broad Arrow Jack, which I'm sure you know very well. You don't. You definitely don't. But the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was written by Alan Moore in 1999, and I think it's probably one of his most famous works. Would you agree?
I think it is. It's probably one of his better works.
It's also one of his better works. It's a good old time. But the original roster for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's kind of like the Avengers or the Justice League in the Victorian era, I suppose.
Very much so.
If you wanted to look at it that way. In fact, you could say that the plot of the bloody original Avengers movie is just a straight up rip off of the plot of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where one man goes around and collects a team to face off against threats that they can't handle on their own. But I'm fairly certain the Avengers did that before anyway.
That's true.
But in that original run, in that original League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, we had Wilhelmina Mina Murray, who is Mina Harker from Dracula. We had Alan Quatermain,
But now she's a vampire.
Now she's a vampire.
Yes.
We had Alan Quatermain, who was the famous protagonist of King Solomon's Mines and Alan Quatermain, the novel. Mm-hmm. We had racist. Captain known racist. We had Captain Nemo, who was from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. We had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And a foreigner. And we had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from Robert Louis Stevens' Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The Invisible Man.
Man's Hulk.
Yeah, Poor Man's Hulk. Interestingly, the original iteration of Mr. Hyde is small and squat.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
He's not big at all. He's small and squat and tiny and very strong all the same, but he's murderous and psychopathic in the same way that Alan Moore's Mr. Hyde is. Then you have the Invisible Man, who is from H.G. Wells'
Chevy
famous
Chase.
thing. Very, very obscure reference there.
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon. A.J. Raffles, who was a character from a bunch of serialized things. He was kind of a rip-off of Sherlock Holmes, because the man who created him, E.W. Hornung, was actually the brother-in-law of Arthur Conan Doyle. So he was kind of a rip-off of him. And then Thomas Carnegie is in there as well in the original roster, and he was an occult detective. So, I mean, you can see all the themes that make comic books popular today. I guess
Ben,
Thomas Carnegie would be kind of a...
What about Tom Sawyer and Dorian Gray?
Dorian Gray feature in the... okay, so, they feature in the film adaptation, Michael, of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which isn't really as good as the comic, I'm afraid. Not as good at all. Not as good at all. That was starring, of course, Mr. Sean Connery as Alan Quatermain.
And Irishman's boss, what's his name? Stuart something?
Oh, Stuart. No, you've put me on the spot. Damn it, Michael.
Is it Stuart something? You keep talking about things and I'll look it up. You were saying something.
Anyway, these are all different homages to things, and I think one of the coolest things about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is the ones it kind of spun off. So the original 2 volumes are great, and then it had a series of spin-offs. We got the Nemo trilogy from that. And in the Nemo trilogy, Alan Moore goes even further back in time.
Stuart Townsend, thank
you very much. He goes even further back into deeper into Victorian literature, and finds all the Penny Dreadful characters that he's going to stitch together. In fact, even Cuchulainn makes an appearance in the Nemo trilogy at one point. So an Irishman sets London again. But yeah, I mean, he's been heavily influenced overall. I think one of his more literary, ambitious kind of things was From Hell, where he fictionalized the life of Jack the Ripper. And I mean, that's a big black and white volume, and it's horrific. It's quite messy.
Again, not a great movie.
Not a great movie. Bloody Johnny Depp. God.
Too much Depp.
Bloody soft Depp.
Too much Depp, not enough depth.
Boom. Johnny Byrne. Got it. No, that's something else. Never mind. Going on from there. He also had Tom Strong. He also created Tom Strong, and Tom Strong was kind of like a big explorer, technological character.
Kind of Doc Bronze Doctor. What was his name?
I can't remember. You put me on the spot again.
That bronze guy. You know the bronze guy, Dr. Bronze Man.
You've lost me.
Bronzy Doctor Shine.
Bronzy Doctor Shine.
He's from that period, but American, and he was a pulp character. And Dr. Bronze Man.
Nope, you've lost.
Ben, you know the guy I'm talking about. He was raised as like the perfect experiment. Man of bronze. Oh, screw it. Doesn't matter. I'll think of it later.
Okay, fine. Fair enough. Great podcasting here all around. But yeah, Tom Strong was kind of this great amalgamation.
Doc Savage.
Thank you very much. He was kind of a great amalgamation of the Jules Verne era kind of technological advances and things like that, and the great explorers of Alan Quatermain and that kind of thing. But I mean, he's had a huge influence. And then if you jump ship to another strong British creator, you can look at The Invisibles by Grant Morrison.
Go on.
And that draws heavily on Victorian literature as well. Many of the characters there are references to Victorian characters. They're kind of weird, time-hoppy, reality jumping. They end up in Victorian times occasionally. I mean,
it's been a while since I've read The Invincibles.
The Invisibles, Michael.
What? Who is Victorian influenced in The Invisibles?
Hang on, I'm going to lose the name. No, I'm going to lose the name. Hang on.
Go on.
Jack Frost has some excuse me.
Very good.
Jack Frost has some influences that are brought on by the Victorian era, but I suppose one of the more interesting ones is, and you'll have to excuse me for saying this, listeners, it's Lord Fanny, who is a Brazilian transgender woman, and she draws a lot of her influence from Victorian era things. She's very much in love with that time period. Even the name Lord Fanny is kind of a British throwback to a certain type of woman in Victorian England. And then Jack, you have different characters like Sir Miles and stuff like that. You have Outer Church, and that's a big church thing. It's all very messy, but I mean, I would say where Alan Moore is very obviously drawing on Victorian edits, Grant Morrison does that thing where he kind of blends it all together, so you really have to pick through it to find different things. So, you know, it's interesting. What I find interesting is a lot of those British creators are so heavily influenced by Victorian era, obviously because they're British, and they would have a much keener awareness of how that shaped their own consumption of literature. Even if you look at 2000 AD, which is a huge thing, Judge Dredd is just a kind of future speculation on the same themes: immigration, crime, mass cities.
He's basically a future version of a Victorian policeman.
I mean, yeah, pretty much. So it's kind of it's all very interesting. Michael, I think we could get a part 2 out of this one. Because I've lots more to say, but we are running out of time, and I believe we have a podcast first here.
We do, Ben. You'll remember a couple of weeks ago we said that people can contact us on Twitter at Mick and Ben, or they can find us on Instagram at Michaelandbenjaminspodcast.
Yes.
Or they can find us on Facebook, Michael and Benjamin's Podcast, or they can find us on YouTube and SoundCloud. We're everywhere, Ben.
Seamless plug.
But we also have yeah, wasn't it? That was pretty good. We also have a bloody email address.
You knocked that
official
out.
email address of the podcast.
You knocked that out of the park there, Michael. That was brilliant.
Thank you very much. The official email address of the podcast is Michaelandbenjaminspodcast at gmail.com.
Gmail.com.
No possessive apostrophe on Benjamins.
Thanks.
So it's just Michaelandbenjaminspodcast at gmail.com. And last week you pointed out that we'd never had an email at the official email address of the podcast. So you'll be thrilled to hear, Ben, that the floodgates have opened and we have received some emails.
Some emails. Amazing.
And the first one is from a lady.
Ooh.
We won't say her name on the air.
Okay.
Because it's her real name attached to the email, so we won't say it. But it says, I'll do it in my famous lady voice.
Yes.
So you have an opportunity to hear. Hi, lads. That's my famous lady voice. Mm-hmm. I felt bad when I heard that you'd never received an email, so I thought I'd say digital hello. I'd also like to hear an episode about science fiction books for beginners. What to delve into first and why. A big hug. A lady.
A lady. That was very good, Michael. It was almost like I was listening to an actual lady.
Ben, I have had quite the experience with actual ladies, so I have a pretty good idea of what they sound like.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah, you pretty much nailed that one. That's good. I think we should do that episode.
Yeah, look, Ben, for me, anyway, let's very briefly address it. For me, I got into science fiction through Star Trek, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for other people. You
wouldn't recommend it for... Yeah, no, Star Trek is a bit heavy.
It's a bit of a quagmire.
Well, I mean, today, Michael, we've talked about bloody Victorian literature, haven't we?
We have, Ben.
Which is interesting, you know. And I mean, those kind of titular characters like Dorian Gray, etc., they're quite short. They're quite easily written because they were meant for kind of more mass consumption. And you'll get to enjoy them. You know, you get to an introduction, but I suppose that's not really what you're looking for if you want proper sci-fi. Sci-fi for beginners would probably be more your Philip K. Dicks, I mean, Asimov has some pretty decent short stories out there. The one that I always go to if you're looking for some really nice, decent introductions is Ray Bradbury.
Right, Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah, I can't argue with a Bradbury. I think he does a great introduction to science fiction themes. I think he's very clever. The book that I would recommend to our lovely emailer is the Illustrated Man collection of short stories, which I think is a great introduction to science fiction and kind of what we're all about here at the podcast.
Benjamin, why don't we throw that question out to the other listeners?
Look at you, Mike. I'm so proud of you. Look at that segue.
Bloody podcast segue. So you throw it out to them, Ben.
Listen, guys, what do you recommend for our emailer? We here are a pair of pedants. We probably get too deeply involved. What was your first love of science fiction? Where did yours come from? And more importantly, what do you think our emailer would enjoy? On top of that, for those of you who are diehard fans of the podcast, what other comics do you think have been influenced? What other comics, TV series, etc., do you think have been influenced by the Victorian era? And have you read much of it yourselves? We want to say a big thank you to all our our commenters from last week. It's nice that you listen. It's nice that you get involved. And a big thank you on my behalf to that tosser that put me in a goddamn psych ward so he could have a bloody podcast.
About bloody karate.
About karate. God damn it. Anyway, that's all from us for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.
Bye.